Welcome to Today of All Days, episode 122.
Are we there yet? Today is My Land is Your Land Monday, the 9th of October, 2017. And today is...
Columbus Day! Columbus Day is a celebration of the day that Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas on October 12th, 1492. The holiday has been celebrated unofficially since the late 18th century and officially since the early 20th century.
This holiday is actually celebrated by many countries other than America, including Spain, Italy, and Latin America. In the US, Columbus Day became a federal holiday in 1937, even though it was celebrated since colonial times.
Columbus Day has always been met with opposition due to the treatment of the Native Americans after Columbus's arrival. In fact, roughly 38% of Americans feel that it shouldn't be a holiday for this exact reason.
Groups like the American Indian Movement argue that actions and injustices towards Native Americans are covered up by the positive myths and holidays for Columbus. To them, it is a celebration of the greatest waves of American Indian genocide in history.
It was important to note that Columbus, for all intents and purposes, was a nobody in Spanish society. He wasn't a nobleman or an aristocrat. He was a son of a weaver, a merchant's clerk, and an expert sailor. Like many travelers of the time, he bargained with the crown to loan him supplies, men, and ships in return for the potential gold and spices he would bring back home, from which he would get a title, land, and a tremendous amount of profit.
On this day in history, Columbus made landfall in what is now the Bahamas, where he was greeted by the Arawak Indians. Columbus wrote of the greeting they received, stating that the Arawaks brought them cotton, spears, parrots, and many other gifts. Other Europeans would later report that the Indians were so hospitable and willing to share their possessions that someone would have to actually see it to believe it.
Columbus observed that the Arawaks had no warring weapons, like no iron like the swords his people carried, and were well built. He immediately thought that the natives would make fine servants, and taking them would be easy since they didn't have weapons to defend themselves. In addition, they wore gold jewelry, which Columbus needed in order to pay his debts to the crown. His first prisoners were taken in order to find out where the gold was.
By now, Columbus had already sent some slaves back to Spain with the promise that there was gold, metals, spices, and endless more slaves to come. In light of this, the crown gave him more ships and more men and supplies to take back. He set up camp in what is now Haiti, and he took more slaves from the surrounding islands to send back to Spain, but too many of the Arawaks were dying en route to his homeland. And he was steadily losing money, losing face, and losing any chance of paying off his debts.
In light of his desperation, Columbus ordered his men to mutilate and kill any Arawaks who failed or refused to locate the gold and spices that he needed. Because there weren't any of the riches he promised, the natives were hopeless. The Arawaks began committing suicide and killing their own babies and children in order to save them from slavery and execution.
Just a few years after Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, half of the 250,000 Arawaks were dead. And by 1515, there were only around 50,000 remaining. And by 1550, all of the Arawaks and their descendants were gone.
In light of the startling truth of Columbus's arrival, South Dakota and Vermont have replaced Columbus Day with Native American Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, with the focus being on the contributions that Native Americans have made in our culture.
Now, as hard as it is to believe that such atrocities could have occurred in the name of discovery and expansion, it is vital to understand that during the time, in many societies around the globe, slavery was an active part of the economy. The Norse took slaves from Gaelic lands, the Tatars from lands across Asia, the Egyptians made slaves of their own people, and indigenous tribes in the Americas, as well as Africa, took slaves from neighboring villages.
The idea of finding servants from another country or land is ingrained in the world's history. Does that make it more acceptable? No. But slavery is still morally reprehensible, and we live in a society where that's more understood now than it was then.
It seems like a general theme in the past few years has been increasingly negative towards holidays like Columbus Day and even Thanksgiving, with more and more people believing that these holidays represent nothing more than just a celebration of genocide and subjugation. I want to pose another view. Without the arrival of Columbus and the consequences thereof, our nation wouldn't be as it is today. The ideologies of the time devastated the indigenous people of this land all the way up until just 2 centuries ago. Even still, Native Americans, my ancestors, have never fully recovered in many respects. However, they have survived.
Our nation is now composed of Europeans, Africans, Islanders, Asians, Middle Easterns, and the native people. Without the contributions of all the cultures that have fused together since Columbus first stepped foot in the Americas, we wouldn't be standing here.
The background of my family touches nearly every continent. And within the history of each line of my predecessors, there's been war, enslavement, and invasion. But with all of it, there have also been peace, justice, and prosperity across all borders.
We cannot deny our history, but we can learn from it. To continue the shame, loathing, and disgust that has been felt over the years with the coming of every war and every injustice that our culture has seen would be to deny the strength that has driven us to our current time, where our nation is united. No matter what we're going through, no matter what hardship we're dealing with, we always make it through.
Columbus Day doesn't have to be a celebration of atrocities, but we shouldn't sweep all that has happened under the rug either like it never happened. Today can be a realization of our own history, a thankfulness that we have created a better world, a respect for each and every culture that has contributed to our development, and an inspiration to keep pushing forward, to shape our world into something that our ancestors would be proud of, a world that bears witness to the perseverance that has been shown across the board.
Columbus Day can stand as a promise to better not just ourselves, but each other with every step toward the future.
So go ahead and make that step. On this day.
Today of all days.
Today of all days.
And we will see y'all tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.